Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Invisible Innocence. I am your host, Megan Moret. Today is going to be quite a ride as I tell you about a man who was finally sentenced to life in prison in the first prosecution of federal statute criminalizing murder in the course of sex trafficking. Before we begin, I would like to advise listeners that this is a topic that is sensitive in nature, so listening discretion is advised. If you are in the car with kids, I would advise you to please wait till later to listen. Let's begin in the early morning of January 13th, 2017. Somorie Moses, also known as Somorie Barfield, Sugar Bear or Daddy, murdered Leandra Foster, one of his sex trafficking victims, by beating her until she died. He beat Leandra all over her body, leaving bruises and abrasions on the front and back of her torso. He inflicted at least 5 blunt force injuries to her head by hitting her directly or by banging her head into another surface. The fatal blow was the one to the back of her head. She had been alive for all of the other injuries, but that last blow to her head fractured her skull, rendering her unconscious. Leandra suffered a seizure and died within minutes. As if this was not bad enough, the next morning the unfathomable happened. Using a knife and saw, Moses dismembered Foster's body inside the apartment that they shared in Brooklyn. And this complete sicko had the audacity to invite another woman over to this apartment for a sexual encounter while Leandra's body was concealed in another room. This woman later told law enforcement that she smelled a strong odor of bleach while she was there at the apartment. 4 days later, on January 17th, 2017, Somorie Moses transported Leandra's torso and limbs to the Bronx to be thrown away at a garbage transfer station. After he left most of her body in the garbage, he texted one of his other victims and said, "Just did 110 over the Brooklyn Bridge," as to say he was some kind of cool guy because he could drive that fast over a bridge. What did he do with Leandra's other body parts? Well, her head, hands, and feet, including a foot with the name Somorie tattooed on it, were found by law enforcement in the freezer inside his apartment. Leandra was only 32 years old at the time of her death. Some of you may be asking, why did they share an apartment together? If he was so bad, why would she stay there? It is so important to understand the level of manipulation that traffickers and people like Somorie Moses use against their victims. He would lure women and girls with false promises of love. He would get them where he wanted them, and before you know it, they were either brainwashed or their fear of retaliation was too great to allow them to leave. Leandra's father, Kenneth Foster, came forward to illuminate just how terrible and tumultuous his daughter's relationship with Somorie was. He talked about the physical and mental abuse that she suffered for months before her death. Despite multiple attempts made by her father and other family members to leave Moses, she would only snap back and tell her family to stop meddling in her business. I think many of us have been in a relationship where we were blinded. Our friends and family could see the dysfunction, but we could not. It may put a rift and distance in our relationship with them, and many times we just do not want that to happen. Leandra Foster was not Somorie Moses' only victim. As I said earlier, she was one of many. It is hard to say exactly how many, but there are 8 that he was convicted of trafficking. According to prosecutors, since 2003, Moses had lured women and girls with false promises of love. Moses would then threaten his victims, rape them, beat them, torture, and psychologically manipulate them into the sex work in Brooklyn and Queens, New York. Moses admitted to collecting all of his victims' earrings, kept all of it, and forced many of the women and girls into tattooing his first name on their bodies. This is typical of many traffickers, to tattoo their victims to identify who they belong to, who they are working for, and for them to never forget who they belong to. It's a great way to show ownership, and that is really sick. I have spent time with many young trafficking survivors, and one of the girls that comes to mind is a fair-skinned girl with blonde hair and beautiful blue eyes. And her trafficker had left the most horrific tattoo on the left side of her face. They were the horrible colors of orange and black. And to be honest, I still to this day have no idea what it was. With that fair skin, and to have a mix of orange and black tattoos on your face is something that I will never, ever forget. It almost looked like scribbling or doodling of some sort on the side of her face. I do want to talk about some of the other victims, but another reminder that some of these details are graphic, so discretion is advised. These victims I will refer to as Jane Does. Somorie Moses threw Jane Doe number 1 off of a roof and raped her. He also, quote, bit off a piece of her buttocks, end quotes, and then he spit it out on her. Another victim had her arms and back slashed with a razor and beat severely with a belt before Moses poured lemon juice into her wounds. This is not a movie. This is real. This is real life. So just a reminder that this is a case that just closed just a couple of months ago. Obviously, this can cause severe mental and physical scarring. Another victim, identified as Jane Doe number 6, she reportedly failed to give Moses the money that he demanded, so he beat her with an extension cord, then taunting her with salt to rub into those wounds. In a similar instance, Jane Doe number 7 told Somorie Moses that she did not want to be a sex worker, and Moses threatened to kill her and her child and placed a shotgun in her mouth. Here's some of the testimony given by Somorie Moses after his defense lawyer, Julie Clark, told Moses to be frank about his profession. Profession? What? Excuse me? I can't even begin to understand why anyone would call this a profession. Let's not classify being a trafficker as a profession, please. It's only to be labeled a monster. He starts off by saying, quote, I'm a pimp. I've been a pimp for about 20 years, end quote. I don't date good girls. I don't date women who are not prostitutes. We call the life a game. It's women, jewelry, and drugs. Moses said he met Leandra Foster about 60 days after he was released from prison from a prior incarceration. He said that he met her at a party at a social club called Boss Rollers. He said it was a venue that mostly dealt with cars, charities, and parties. But we now know that this establishment was a club with big ties to prostitution and pimps, although Moses said he was unaware of that fact. Yeah, I'm sure he was there for all of the charitable things they were doing for the community. Leandra was there with someone else, but after she saw his connections there, one being a man whose life he saved in prison, she decided to leave with him. Soon after, Moses moved in with Leandra, and this would be the start of a complicated personal and professional lifestyle that included a lot of drugs, alcohol, and abuse. He said, quote, "Me and Lily used to roll all the time," end quotes. He said, using her nickname. We drank, smoked drugs, and indulged in a lot of ecstasy. He said that Leandra introduced him to a lifestyle that he was hesitant about. He said, quote, "I had a lot of apprehension about how she moved. Lily had never been to prison. She didn't know what was dangerous," end quote. This is coming from a convicted criminal, a registered sex offender that has been in and out of prison, and we are supposed to believe that he was apprehensive about this lifestyle, not buying it. Moses said that this lifestyle soon led to violence. He said, Lily was a good-hearted person if you needed a place to stay. This would lead to arguments that quickly turned violent. He said, I smacked Lily around. I caused some black eyes. So how did he end up killing Leandra, and why? Moses' testimony was that, quote, "I didn't kill her. I didn't know she was going to die. We acted like children. We were in love," end quote. In the early morning hours of January 13th, 2017, Moses said he returned to their apartment after a drug run and downed several ecstasy pills. During this time, Leandra was in another room with a foot fetish client, according to Moses. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, and he woke up hearing disturbing noises coming from the living room area. He said, quote, "I'm hearing a whacking sound or squishing sound. Then I hear a scream, muffled from her," end quote. He then jumped up, grabbed an unregistered, of course, gun, and confronted the attacker, who also had a weapon. He said, "I go into the room and tell him, I'm going to bust your head in. I punched him in the ribs and hit him on the back of the head, and I am stomping on him." He said that he kicks the other man out and then turns his anger towards Leandra. He was upset because she did not call on him when the situation got bad. Trying to make himself sound like a caring boyfriend, I think not. Moses was to be the only one to beat and assault Leandra. How dare another man come and try to do the same things to this woman? He said, "I smacked her. I might have struck her 4 or 5 times across her face, front hand and back." Moses said that Leandra went to take a shower, and while he is on the phone with a friend, he hears a series of bumps like somebody fell. He went into the bathroom to investigate and says he found her slumped over on the tub, that he helped her up, but she fell again, hitting the porcelain and causing a gash on her head. He said that she seemed to suffer a seizure and then did a Google search for the cause of such a condition. I think we could call it brain damage from being beaten so badly. I hope that came up in his Google search. He said, quote, "I wanted to know how I could help her," end quote, but he decided not to call 911 due to his past criminal history and fear of going back to prison. The assistant DA, Sabiha Madni, wasn't buying his story either. She questioned how he could have taken her out, and after knowing the kind of condition that she was in, how he could have gone about things the way that he did. How could he have taken that many ecstasy pills, which is an upper, and passed out? Moses replied to her questioning, quote, "I had been up for 2 days. Everything looked like a cartoon. I was about to crash." Mani also introduced several phone texts between Moses and the victim, portraying a high level of violence, including a text from Leandra to Moses. She said, "You beat me with a belt, put a bag over my head, and put me in a closet." It sounds like the abuse from Moses towards Leandra had no end in sight. We have heard time after time that hurt people hurt people. Abusers of this nature usually experienced a abusive and traumatic childhood themselves. We are told that the cycle of abuse can be an unending circle that continues generation after generation. I mean, how else could someone be this cruel, right? While we don't know much about Somorie Moses' childhood, what we do know is that he had been abusive for a very long time and that he had many encounters with the law. I'm going to read a few paragraphs from a letter that he wrote to one of his many children's mothers while he was incarcerated. This took place several years before Leandra's murder, because like I said, he has been in and out of prison for various things. "What's up? I guess you can tell where I'm at. The FBI came for me on my 30th birthday. I got snitched on. They had me on 13 felonies, 17 misdemeanors. But I guess the Lord was with me because I slipped through on a pimp charge. I got a little time to do, but I can't complain. It could have been a lot worse. I was thinking about my life lately, and you keep coming up. I wonder where we went wrong. Well, I think all my lies is where it happened. You never knew me. I told you a lot of what you wanted to hear. When I wanted you around, I was sweet. When I didn't need you, I was abusive. I learned how to push your buttons long ago. You see, I was always good at that all my life. I never really could feel for another person. I just became numb years ago. It's all one big game. I used to wish I could fall in love and be with one woman, but my heart never was there. I never really been in love, never even thought about it, never trusted or believed in any woman. I used them for what I needed. The years when I was with you was one lie after another." This letter is several pages long, but I wanted to read this first page because I think that it gives us a good look at who he is and the kind of manipulator that he was all of his life, that he wasn't capable of having empathy or compassion for another person. And I think of his poor children. He's got several children, and he says later in the letter that he doesn't even know the name of his twins. Um, and to think that you have a father that is capable of doing such monstrous things is really, really sad. Maybe he loves and cares for his children, especially after hearing him describe himself in this letter later that, he is someone who is not capable of love or trust. I think that he became numb years ago, as though he is just completely disconnected from life and from relationships and even consequences. He says that he is now alive and that enough is enough. He doesn't want to be tough anymore, he says later in this letter, and then continues to disrespect people and talk about them as though they were trash. The last obvious assumption that I have of this man is that he was an opportunist. He does and says what he needs to in order to get what he wants, and he will do this at any cost. His life didn't change much after he wrote this letter. He continued to go back and forth in and out of prison, continued to be a pimp, and just 13 years later, murdered and dismembered Leandra Foster. On April 5th, 2024, the United States District Judge Carol Bagley Amon sentenced Somorie Moses to 10 terms of life imprisonment to run concurrently for each of the 10 counts of conviction for sex trafficking 8 women and for the murder of Leandra Foster. Somorie Moses had pleaded guilty to these charges in September 2023. This heartbreaking saga serves as a poignant reminder of the urgent necessity to address domestic abuse and to ensure the safety of vulnerable individuals within our society. Just one person that we can help through awareness like this, it makes it all worth listening to these horrific stories, even though sometimes we want to cover our eyes or cover our ears. If you know anyone, or you might think that you are being victimized in this way, in any type of abuse, please call 911. As a resource, you can call the Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888. Thank you so much for listening, and if you see something, please say something.